Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Kelly, CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Communications. We really appreciate you tuning in on this hot Monday. So, Brian, we do have a special guest, but there are a couple of stories to touch on before we get to that interview. The first up is interest rates. What's happening?
Yeah, there was a meeting of the Federal Reserve Board of Directors last week, and no surprises in that meeting on the heels of an inflation report that also had no surprises. So CPI came in right about where it was expected to come in, which meant that the Federal Reserve's actions um, were about what everybody expected, and that is to keep the interest rates at right now. The Fed funds overnight rate is target rate between 5.25 and 5.5%. It has been that way for a little while. We're going to cover during our Data Monday session here at the end some of the categories and what happened with the recent inflation rate. So the real question on these meetings is usually what hints were dropped about what to expect in the future. And so I like to just kind of capture or jot down some of the phrases that are used, the words that the chair of the Federal Reserve Board of Directors uses are very closely scrutinized and analyzed. So they're very careful. They stay on script, and the things that they say mean something. Uh, he said that the post-pandemic normalization of the labor market has now run its course. So what I heard that to mean was that the labor market, like we're at the new normal, right? We're not transitioning back from what it was before. We're waiting for something to return. We're kind of at it's that process has now run its course. It is what it is today. Um, he noted that that recent inflation readings have eased somewhat. So that's not a ringing endorsement that things are going exactly in the right direction, but generally inching toward the right direction, which is what uh, really what the last year has been about. So forward progress on inflation, but just kind of like gradually inching toward the target rate. Still, about 3.3%, and of course the Fed target rate is 2 on inflation. Supply and demand labor market are in better balance today, he said, and also that if the economy remains solid and inflation persists, we're prepared to maintain the current target rate. Okay, so um, that is an indication that they're probably going to hold the rates where they're at for a little while. However, he did essentially set the expectation that later on this year, perhaps one cut. So the cutting interest rate cut part of this process of loosening the monetary policies of the Federal Reserve will probably start toward the end of the year, which puts it like right in the middle of election season, which always makes these things a little more complicated. But nevertheless, certainly welcome news for capital intensive businesses that have to borrow. That maybe there's light at the end of the tunnel here, but as for now, really, and probably throughout the summer, just sit tight because the interest rates are about where they're going to be.
All right, and now we have an update on the economic development package that we've covered kind of in depth here on the briefing. It seems like it might be looking fairly unlikely to happen at this point.
Yeah, there's a big development last week in the legislature. So this is part of the budget. There's about a $600 million fund that was created last year in order to pay for larger scale economic development projects. There was a package that was kind of struck between a few different groups or parties within the legislative process to try to separate out some of the big scale economic development projects, but also support housing and public transit with about half of those resources. And it looked like there was maybe a little bit of momentum with that, but then it got kind of like often happens in the legislative process. It got pitted against another thing, and that other thing was education. This education request and somewhat of a controversy over what the retirement contribution, whether they put more of that toward the classroom today or keep on paying into the retirement system. And so these things got kind of linked together. There were several in the education community that said, hey, don't do the economic development thing, because if you do, it'll be harder to support education. That was, I thought, a pretty good signal that this economic development package is in trouble and is less likely to happen. So it's hard to say, because now they're at a stage, it's not particularly transparent. You can't see into the system at this stage of the negotiation of the budget, but it looks less likely today to me that the economic development package will pass, given that it has now been kind of pitted against some of the education interests.
All right, so Brian, we have a special guest with us today. We have Terry Rush, who is director within the Senior Health Services at Emergent Holdings, and they market and manage Medicare products on behalf of our partners at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan.
Yeah, really looking forward to this conversation, because as we know, the workforce has changed over the years, but one of the secrets to Michigan's success over the years has been that when we have an older than average population, that people in Michigan have tended to work longer as well. And so whether somebody's retiring or somebody's still in the workforce but hits that Medicaid or Medicare um, eligibility age, what does that mean? How do we support our employees through that? And as always, the experts that we turn to, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan. Terry, let's start out with just who are you and a little bit about your role with Blue Cross.
Yeah, so thanks for having me, Brian. My name is Terry Rush. I'm the director at Senior Health Services at Emergent Holdings. And what we do is we market and manage Medicare products on behalf of Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan.
So how about let's start with just like a level set. Why does your work, why does what you do, why does this matter to a small business owner?
Excellent question. So, again, explaining the ins and outs of Medicare can be very hard, and supporting retiring employees' healthcare needs when they leave an organization shouldn't be another task on a small business owner's to do list. And so, our focus here is to help bridge the gap for retiring employees so they can transition smoothly from their employee healthcare coverage to one of our individual Medicare plans. Employees may not even know that they can purchase a Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan individual Medicare plan once they retire, but you know what? They can.
So what sort of things are available? Like mechanically, what do you guys do to help with that process? Either whether it's with an HR function or directly with the team members.
Yeah, another great question. So, a couple things here. So, on our website, we have what's called an employer toolkit, and the link is called Planning for Healthcare and Retirement. And this is located on our website again, bcbsm.com/engage-retire. The nice thing about this here is it also contains what's called Your Journey to Medicare Folio. And this document contains the basics of Medicare information, along with a ready to help plan, also along with a one-click send email and other tools that they can share with their employees. And again, it's very easy to download.
So how about the employees themselves? Do you engage directly with employees?
We do. So we can provide Medicare 101 webinars for groups and their members. We can support health fairs, open enrollment meetings, both in person and virtually. And basically, what our team is built for is to answer questions and support the needs of employers and their employees as they're making these life changes, and provide important information they will need to be ready for what's ahead and navigating the Medicare landscape. We cover things like what are their plan options? Will they still have coverage through their employer once they retire? How can they enroll in a Medicare plan? What are the important Medicare enrollment milestones? And then lastly, what are the costs?
So when a person does hit that Medicare eligible age, of course that only happens once. People don't have, it's not intuitive. People don't have experience doing this. So uh, like, are they required to enroll? I mean, how do they find out like what is required, what they're supposed to do?
Yeah, great question. So every situation is unique here. So there's a lot of different factors to consider. So things like, is the employee actively working? Is the employee working at a company with fewer or more than 20 employees? Is the employee married and is their spouse Medicare eligible? Is the employee contributing to an HSA? So really, in short, there's not one answer that fits everything. It's really best to do your homework, plan well in advance, and really speak to licensed individuals who are qualified to guide these employees through any questions they might have to ensure they make the right choice when it's time to choose a plan.
All right, so final question. If a business owner watching, or maybe somebody that handles HR for them wants to engage, wants to really support their team or ensure that everything is being done correctly, and employees going through this transition, how do they reach out? How do they connect with you?
Another great question. So first thing that they'd probably do is they would reach out to their preferred Blue Cross independent agent. They may have an agent today that writes the group commercial business with them. That would probably be the first line of defense, if you will. They can also email us, though. We do have our own email address. It's g2isales@bcbsm.com. And basically, our motto is we are here and ready to help. So happy to answer any questions that might come along the way. But first step, reach out to your agent.
Awesome. All right. Thanks for the information, all the work, and for the partnership between Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Michigan, along with SBAM. We really appreciate your support, your expertise over the years.
Appreciate the time, Brian. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Brian.
All right, thanks, Terry. I did share a link with some additional resources here on Zoom and on Facebook as well. And then we have a few more resources that will be on our website later this afternoon. All right, so Brian, let's talk about tax foundation rankings. What's
Yeah,
the latest here?
I came across the other day. I was looking something up and came across the Tax Foundation state by state rankings. This is kind of the gold standard of ranking the tax systems in the United States, and the actually around the world too. But there was a but I couldn't remember whether this year's rankings had ever been shared on the briefing. I don't think that we have. So the Michigan's ranking stayed about the same. Actually, we've tended to be between 10 and 20 in terms of the overall business tax ranking. It looks at everything from the employer taxes like workers' comp and unemployment, but then all the way through to income taxes, sales taxes, use taxes, corporate taxes, property taxes, all the different types of taxes that a business might have to pay. And then it just ranks the states, and it ranks in several different ways. So I thought it was kind of interesting to, while we didn't crack the top 10, we have actually stayed pretty close to 10. We came in 11th in the most current rankings. But if you were to look at and people might be surprised by that because like we're not like the best on anything, but really we do okay in all of the rankings. A lot of states they might be low in one area and high in another. In Michigan, taxes in all these different ways, but tends to be competitive in each one. So I'll give you an example. In our income tax, while sure it might be more advantageous for many to not have a state income tax, but ours is flat and has a relatively low rate. So if you're going to have an income tax, that's the way to do it. According to the competitiveness of these rankings. So the top states, the top 10, were Wyoming, South Dakota, Alaska, Florida, Montana, New Hampshire, Nevada, Utah, North Carolina, and Indiana. So those were the top 10 in order. And then Michigan would have been next behind that, number 11. So what I did was I went through and I looked at just kind of, and from an income tax standpoint, what did these states have in common? And basically 9 out of the 10 of the top states had either no income tax or a flat income tax. And only one of them had a graduated income tax. That one, Montana. So Montana was in the top 10. That was kind of the the outlier, if you will, that had an income tax with a graduated system. But when I looked closer at Montana, it's kind of interesting to me to see what was it that made them so competitive. Well, they don't have a sales tax, first of all. So sales and use taxes are, depending on what line of work or what industry that you're in, this can be a pretty big piece of your overall puzzle. So they don't have a sales tax, and then the graduated income tax that they have has a very narrow band. So it says even though it is technically graduated, it's pretty flat still. So in other words, the top rate and the bottom rate are pretty low, and they have very low property taxes too. So just kind of some gives and takes, but really Michigan's income tax system being at 4.25 and held flat is something I think really does contribute to our overall tax rankings. Now the bottom 10 I'll just run through really quickly. Starting at number 41, Rhode Island, Hawaii, Vermont, Minnesota, Maryland, Massachusetts, Connecticut, California, New York, and New Jersey. So pretty heavily weighted in the Northeast, but then of course included California and Hawaii over on the west side of the country. So no particular surprises there. There wasn't any of those. I thought, oh, I didn't expect to see that low on the list to where I even had to look it up, because those are definitely more expensive states tax wise. So pretty, I would say pretty overall interesting. But if you look at the similarities in the top states, and then, we could have overlaid some other things too in terms of economic growth. It doesn't line up perfect, but you do see several high growth states that are in the top 10, and you see shrinking states. Some of the shrinking states, New York and California in particular, that you see in the bottom 10.
All right, well, thanks for the update there. Next up on today's list is that Blue Cross Blue Shield, our friends who were just here, they've dropped their GLP-1 obesity drugs.
Yeah, this hit the news just, I think it was last week, and I made a note of it to just kind of bring up, not that not because, I mean, us man has no opinion on, what's the appropriate thing to cover, but one of the things we do have an opinion on is just the growth in the cost of health insurance. And we've seen some, projections over the future that's just going to get tougher and tougher. And one of the things that is pushing up the overall cost and therefore pushing up rates is the cost of prescriptions. And so there's a kind of a new class of weight loss drugs that went from like 0 to 60 really, really fast and became a huge expense that is one of the factors contributing to higher growth rates. And so several of the major insurers, including Blue Cross, actually Blue Cross, I think, was the last one to do this, to say that those drugs will be used for certain diagnoses, but not just overall for weight loss. So for example, if you have diabetes, then it could be prescribed for that, but not just because you want to lose weight. And the reasons given, of course, the backdrop of all of this is the overall cost, but they're new, the long-term effectiveness, does the weight stay off? Does it just come right back on? Are there other side effects? All these sorts of things are still fairly open questions, but overall, just one of those steps that are being taken to try to mitigate some of the difficulty in kind of containing costs in the healthcare system. Which, when we look at the inflation numbers, you'll see that this is, while a lot of cost increases have started to mitigate over the last couple of years, not so much in healthcare.
All right, one more story before we get to Data Monday, and that is that the UAW's Sean Fain is facing some new accusations.
Yeah, so there's a government agency that does investigations on unions, and so you can make a complaint, and this is a complaint actually from other people within the union, and it has it's really it could just be a power struggle within the union. You never really know on these sorts of things, but but the reason that it stuck out to me is because in a lot of ways this new leadership, even though it's been very dramatic, it's kind of prided itself in being above or beyond the type of corruption that existed in unions over the previous 10 years when there were lots of problems. Certain people went to prison over it. And so the unions, I think, have been trying generally to get past that, to move the organizations past those problems. So these accusations, which are coming from within the union itself, and it's a little bit cryptic, but had been widely reported. So it's something that is now an active investigation. As that kind of moves its way through the process, certainly if it turns into anything, we'll share it. But at this point, so a point of interest that an agency following an accusation is investigating. The nature of that investigation is, I say the wording in the complaint was fairly cryptic, to where it's difficult really to get to the bottom of whether this is a corruption allegation, or if it's something that has more to do with a practice of fairness, a rule violation, or what.
All right, well, time will tell on that one. Let's take a look at today's Data Monday report.
All right, Data Monday. See, I'm going to share this. The first thing I'm sharing here is from the New York Times. You guys know that I read there. There are several 5 publications I read first thing every morning, and one of them is the New York Times. They do some really good data work and some graphs. And this one I was interesting enough, I wanted to pull and share. And it's, if you see that there's not just in this country, but really across Europe, you'll see like elections and immigration issues that have kind of taken more precedent. So I'm going to try to help you understand like the context of what's happening around the world, not just here in this country, in terms of the total amount of migration, the change in population and demographics across countries. And it's been a lot in a very short period of time. And there's certain unrest in a lot of places, a lot of people that are trying to get out of bad situations and get to more stable situations. Europe and the United States being 2 places where, of course, people want to go. So, in looking at these countries, you look at Sweden. In 1990, 9% of the population was foreign born. In 2020, 20%. Look at Spain, was only 2% back in 1990, and today 15%. And then the U.S. has gone from 9 to 15%. So this isn't shared I'm not saying that this is good or bad or indifferent. For every country, there's a different answer for what this means, what the ramifications are how well they are suited for handling this type of influx of people and so forth. But it does provide, I think, an important context for the type of election results and election issues that are coming up. And of course, our country is no exception to that. So CPI, so we talked about the Consumer Price Index, and so this is a report that was, boring in a good way. It came in right about where it was expected to. The CPI for overall, and in the core rate, which is where they take out the food and energy differences, we're both at still too high, but moderate rates. It's generally seeing the core rate come down in this last month was a welcome change. Now these next 2 charts, one is year over year. So this is the change in certain expenses this month compared to the same month a year from now. We're going to look at, and then we're going to look the month over month, this month compared to last month in the next chart. So you see overall 3.3%. So that was the average of everything. motor vehicle insurance. I've actually heard just kind of like generally, organically throughout the landscape, people mentioning, wow, it seems like my insurance went up a lot. And so you see that that's a phenomenon that's happening all over the country. Um, Tobacco and smoking products, motor vehicle maintenance and repair. Remember when I said hospital services or healthcare costs? Look at it's number 4 on this list. So still a pretty fast rise. You consider overall inflation is at 3.3%, more than half or double that for overall hospital expenses. Airfare actually down. I just bought some tickets. It didn't seem like it was down, but according to this data, it is. And then the used cars and trucks that had gotten just kind of like way up in terms of the prices before have continued to fall. And then looking at month over month, so this gives you a better idea of real-time expense changes, and you'll see hospital services were number 4 on this list too. There's some of the other things that kind of move around on the list, but when you see that year over year was the top 5, and over this month, it's it just means there's probably still some muscle behind that those types of increases. Now, looking at a separate small business survey, which the National Federation of Independent Businesses do. So they ask, in the blue, you see small businesses that are paying higher prices or expected to pay higher prices in the future. And then those that have plans, are they planning on charging higher prices? And you'll see that both of these metrics seem to have kind of settled down. They were way up, they came down, and they settled down, and maybe a slightly elevated, but kind of normal-ish level. And then another one is small business job openings hard to fill. That's the blue line. And then small business hiring plans. It's an index for businesses planning to hire. You notice that both of those moved, and while the trends on both kind of over the last year look pretty good, but but definitely up in this survey compared to last survey, moving in the wrong direction. And then small businesses saying it's a good time to expand, pretty low, down at 4%. So this is I would say an indication that at least for the businesses answering this survey, that they're in a sit tight type of a mode, see how things go. And then this last one here, I just wanted to share with you some context of the Fed funds rate and where it stands today as compared to other times when the rate has been increased and monetary policy tightened. And you'll see that it's as high as it's been since going back to the turn of the century. But then also it's actually a little bit higher than it was in the lead up to the Great Recession. So the fact that the economy has stayed resilient in the face of this type of an increase compared to what we saw happen last time, because there was a recession here. So this reduction right here in the interest rates was in response to a recession, and then a really deep recession here. And so the rates went quite low after that. The fact that our economy has stayed pretty robust this time during these the tightening has been, I would say, a surprise. I'm still kind of surprised at how it has stayed so resilient in the face of higher borrowing costs. So I think it almost calls into question, like, how effective is the Fed's toolbox? It seems to be generally working in terms of inflation heading in the right direction, but it has been a slog over now what has been years in trying to tighten up fiscal policy, and still not hitting that target.
All right, well, thanks for that Data Monday report. Before we say goodbye today, I just want to call your attention to a couple of events happening next week. We actually have a webinar on the Fair Labor Standards Act and ensuring compliance. So if you're curious about how that impacts you and your employees, please join us next week. And we have 2 of our owner-to-owner events in in Southeast Michigan, including one at the Rocket Mortgage Classic. So visit sbam.org/events for more details. We'll be back here Thursday at 3 p.m. Have a great week.
Thanks, everybody. See you on Thursday.